If you love differently now, I want to ask you something, not loudly, not dramatically, but quietly, the way questions arrive when the world finally slows down. There was a time when love felt simple, almost automatic. You gave it freely, without calculations, without defenses, without asking whether it would cost you something later. Back then, love was movement, fast, impulsive, fueled by hope more than understanding. But somewhere along the way, experience entered the room. Loss sat beside you. Disappointment spoke up, and suddenly love stopped being a rush and became a decision. Elon Musk once said that starting anything meaningful requires a tolerance for pain, and love, real love, is no different. Because love, when you're young, feels like discovery. But love, when you've lived, feels like responsibility. You've seen what happens when emotions burn faster than wisdom. You've watched promises collapse under pressure. You've learned that intensity doesn't equal longevity. And so now when you love, it's quieter, slower, more deliberate. You don't fall, you step forward. You don't chase, you observe. You don't attach quickly, you measure alignment. And some people mistake that for coldness. They say you've changed, that you're guarded, that you're harder to reach. But the truth is, you're not loving less, you're loving with awareness. You understand that love doesn't exist to save you, distract you, or complete you. Love exists to build with you, not rescue you from yourself. You've realized that chemistry is common, but compatibility is rare. That attraction can ignite instantly, but respect must be engineered over time. And this understanding didn't come from theory. It came from scars, from staying too long, from believing too deeply, from giving more than was returned. So now when someone asks why you don't love the way you used to, the answer is simple: because you know more now. Because you've learned that loving blindly isn't bravery, it's risk without strategy. And grown hearts don't gamble with something they've rebuilt from broken pieces. At some point, you stopped looking for someone to fill a void, and started looking for someone who could stand beside you without shrinking or demanding you shrink. That shift changes everything. It changes how you listen, how you argue, how you choose silence over reaction. Elon Musk talks often about first principles, breaking things down to what truly matters. And when you apply that to love, you realize something profound. Love isn't about intensity, it's about sustainability. Can this connection survive pressure? Can it endure boredom? Can it handle growth without fear? You no longer confuse chaos with passion. You no longer mistake emotional unpredictability for depth. You've learned that peace is not boring, it's advanced. And because of that, you walk away faster now. Not because you care less, but because you care enough to protect what you've built internally. You no longer negotiate your values for attention. You no longer chase potential while ignoring reality. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. And yes, this means fewer people get access to you. But access was never meant to be universal. You understand that love is not about how hard you feel. It's about how well you function together. About mutual respect. About emotional accountability. About choosing each other on ordinary days, not just dramatic ones. You've learned that someone can love you and still be wrong for your life. That affection without alignment leads to exhaustion. That wanting each other is not the same as moving in the same direction. So now, you pause. Watch patterns, not words. You notice how someone handles stress, disappointment, responsibility. You ask yourself, not do I feel something, but can I build something here without losing myself? And that question alone separates youthful love from grown love. Because grown love doesn't rush to prove anything. It doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't scream. It stands firm. It waits. It knows that the right connection doesn't require constant explanation or emotional labor. And if that makes you seem distant to those who still confuse urgency with meaning, let them misunderstand. You didn't become this way by accident. You became this way by surviving. So here is the loving question, the one meant only for grown hearts. If you love differently now, Do you forgive yourself for it? Do you allow yourself to honor the wisdom you earned, instead of mourning the innocence you lost? Because loving differently is not a failure. It's evolution. It's proof that you paid attention, that you learned, that you refused to repeat cycles just because they felt familiar. Elon Musk once said that progress requires letting go of what no longer works, even if it once did. And love is no exception. You are not colder. You are clearer. You are not distant. You are discerning. You are not difficult. You are intentional. And one day someone will meet you at this level, not intimidated by your depth, not threatened by your boundaries, not confused by your calm. Someone who understands that love isn't about possession, but partnership. Not about intensity, but endurance. Until then, don't rush yourself back into an old version of love just to feel chosen. You already chose yourself, and that was the hardest part. Loving differently now means you no longer abandon yourself to keep someone else comfortable. It means you understand that real connection doesn't demand self-betrayal. And if the world tells you that your love has become too quiet, too selective, too serious, let it talk. Grown hearts don't need applause. They need truth. So love slowly, love honestly, love with structure, with vision, with patience. Because when love is built, not chased, it doesn't collapse under pressure. And when the right person arrives, they won't ask why you love differently now. They'll understand. There is a quiet loneliness that comes with loving differently, and no one really talks about it. It's not the loneliness of being alone. It's the loneliness of being selective, of realizing that not everyone gets to walk beside you anymore, of knowing that you could connect, but choosing not to, because connection without alignment feels heavier than solitude. This kind of loneliness doesn't scream, it sits with you in silence. And yet, it's not empty, it's intentional. You've learned that your peace is expensive, and not everyone can afford access to it. So you become comfortable with your own company. You stop rushing conversations. You stop forcing chemistry. You stop explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from you having none. This is where many people mistake your calm for detachment, but it's not detachment. It's self-respect. You no longer need constant interaction to feel valued. You no longer need emotional noise to feel alive. You've learned how to sit with yourself without feeling the urge to escape. And that changes how you love. Because now, love is no longer something you seek to fill space. It's something you invite only when it enhances what you've already built. Loving differently also means you've made peace with timing. You no longer believe that missing someone automatically means you should go back. You no longer interpret nostalgia as a sign. You understand that longing doesn't equal compatibility, that memories can be beautiful and still belong in the past. You've learned that growth sometimes requires separation, even from people you once loved deeply, and that realization is painful, but it's honest. You no longer chase closure from people who aren't capable of giving it. You create closure within yourself. You stop reopening doors just to see if something has changed because you've changed enough to know what you need. This is not bitterness. This is maturity. You can wish someone well without wishing them back. You can appreciate what was without sacrificing what could be. And that ability comes only after you've stopped abandoning yourself for the sake of connection. You've learned that love doesn't mean staying no matter what. It means choosing what aligns with your future, not your past. And then there is trust. Not the naive kind you had before, but the earned kind. The kind that grows slowly, quietly, without pressure. You no longer hand trust to words. You let actions collect it over time. You understand that consistency is not boring, it's rare, and you value it now more than intensity. You no longer need constant reassurance, but you do need reliability. You've learned that love feels safest when it doesn't keep you guessing, when it doesn't trigger old wounds, when it doesn't require emotional labor just to maintain balance. So when someone shows up steadily, respects your boundaries, and communicates honestly, you notice. You appreciate it deeply. And when someone doesn't, you don't chase clarity, you choose distance. This isn't avoidance, it's discernment. It's knowing that peace is not something you negotiate anymore. So if you love differently now, honor that. Honor the version of you that learned the hard way, the version that rebuilt quietly, without applause, the version that chose healing over familiarity, growth over comfort, and truth over illusion. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too much. You are simply awake. And one day when love meets you at this level, not demanding, not chaotic, not consuming, but steady, mutual, and real, you'll understand why everything before had to fall apart. Until then, continue loving in a way that protects your peace and respects your future. Because grown hearts don't rush love. They recognize it. And when it arrives, it feels like home. Not because it's intense, but because it's right. There comes a moment in life when you realize that loving differently also means thinking differently about yourself. Because love is no longer something you use to define your worth, but something that reflects it. And that shift alone changes the way you move through the world. You stop asking who will choose you and start asking who is capable of meeting you where you stand. Not where you pretend to be, not where you used to be, but where you are now. With all your clarity, all your boundaries, all your earned self-respect. And this awareness can feel heavy at first because it separates you from many people you once felt close to, people who loved the old version of you. The version that overgave, over-explained, overextended, and stayed quiet to keep the peace. But that version was tired, and you finally listened to that exhaustion instead of silencing it. Loving differently now means you no longer confuse attention with intention. You no longer feel flattered by interest that lacks effort. You no longer mistake words for commitment. And this doesn't make you harder to love. It makes you impossible to manipulate. Because when you know yourself, deeply shallow connections lose their appeal. You've learned that love is not proven in grand gestures alone, but in the ordinary moments where someone shows up without being reminded, where they respect your time, your energy, your emotional rhythm. And you've learned that real intimacy doesn't rush to impress, it settles into understanding. And because of that, you're no longer in a hurry, not because you're afraid, but because you finally understand the cost of choosing wrong, the quiet cost that doesn't show up immediately but accumulates slowly. Lost time, lost peace, lost self, trust, and you refuse to pay that price again just to avoid being alone. There's a strength in that decision that few people recognize, because from the outside it looks like distance, but from the inside it feels like alignment, and you've come to value that feeling more than validation, more than excitement, more than being desired by someone who cannot sustain you emotionally. Loving differently also means you accept that not everyone who crosses your path is meant to stay. And you no longer try to force permanence out of temporary connections. You allow people to be chapters instead of the whole story. And this acceptance brings a quiet freedom, because you stop clinging to what fades and start investing in what grows. You've learned that love does not ask you to abandon your intuition. It sharpens it. And now when something feels off, you don't explain it away, you don't minimize it, you don't wait for proof in the form of pain. You trust yourself the first time. And that trust is something you once gave, too easily to others, and withheld from yourself, but not anymore. You understand now that boundaries are not walls, they are filters, and the right people don't crash into them, they respect them, and because of this, your relationships, romantic or otherwise, become fewer but deeper, quieter but stronger, simpler but more honest. Loving differently also means you stop romanticizing struggle. You stop believing that love must be difficult to be real. You stop equating emotional turbulence with connection. And instead you recognize that the most profound love often feels calm, steady, almost understated, because it doesn't demand your attention through chaos. It earns it through consistency. You've learned that peace is not the absence of passion. It's the presence of security, and that security allows love to breathe instead of burn out. And this understanding reshapes your expectations, your patience, your tolerance for excuses, because you no longer stay where effort feels forced or presence feels conditional. Loving differently means you finally accept that compatibility is not something you negotiate into existence. It's something you recognize, and when it's missing, no amount of chemistry can compensate for it long term. You've lived long enough to know that attraction without alignment leads to resentment, that affection without respect leads to imbalance, and that love without shared values leads to quiet loneliness even when you're not alone, and so you choose carefully now, not from fear but from foresight, because you are building a life, not just chasing a feeling, and anyone who walks beside you must add to that structure, not destabilize it. Loving differently also means you forgive yourself for staying too long in the past, for ignoring signs you see clearly now, for believing people would become who they promised to be instead of who they consistently showed you they were, because you understand that growth requires compassion for your former self, not punishment, and you honor that version of you for surviving with the tools they had at the time. You no longer shame yourself for being hopeful, for loving deeply, for believing in potential. You simply choose differently now, with open eyes instead of blind faith. Loving differently means you don't beg for clarity anymore, because confusion itself is clarity, and you don't chase consistency, because inconsistency is already an answer, and this awareness saves you time, energy, and emotional investment that you now redirect inward, toward your goals, your healing, your purpose. You've realized that love should support your evolution, not compete with it, and anyone who feels threatened by your growth is not aligned with your future. Loving differently also means you stop explaining your boundaries to people who benefit from crossing them. You stop justifying your need for space, for time, for emotional safety, because you finally understand that the right people don't require convincing, they require honesty, and as a result, your love becomes quieter but stronger, slower but more intentional, less reactive and more grounded. And while this version of love may not create dramatic stories, it creates stability, and stability is where trust grows, where intimacy deepens, where partnership becomes possible. Loving differently now means you don't fall in love with someone's words. You fall in love with how they treat you when no one is watching, how they handle conflict, how they respect your independence, how they support your dreams without trying to control them. You've learned that love is not about possession, it's about mutual freedom, not about losing yourself, but about expanding together. And yes, this path can feel lonely at times, because it requires patience in a world addicted to immediacy, but you've learned that rushing love often leads to rebuilding alone, and you are no longer willing to sacrifice long-term peace for short-term connection. Loving differently also means you trust timing more than urgency. You allow relationships to unfold instead of forcing outcomes. You let people reveal themselves naturally instead of projecting who you want them to be, and this patience protects you from disappointment disguised as hope. You've come to understand that the right love won't make you anxious, won't make you question your worth, won't make you feel like you're asking for too much when you're simply asking for respect. And because of this understanding, you wait, not passively, but intentionally, knowing that what aligns with you will find you without you having to abandon yourself in the process. And when that love arrives, it won't feel like fireworks that burn out quickly. It will feel like warmth that lasts, like safety that allows vulnerability, like partnership that makes life lighter instead of heavier. Until then, you continue living fully, loving carefully, growing steadily, because loving differently now doesn't mean you stop believing in love. It means you finally believe in yourself enough to require love that matches who you've become.